All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we have Stephen Pynnaker, who is an interfaith master and all things Mormon guy as an evangelical. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about his new YouTube channel, the Utah Interfaith Forum. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. And I had to wear my Joseph Smith for President shirt just for this episode. It just doesn't get any more interfaith than that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want one of those.
Got to go to the Red Brick store in Nauvoo, Illinois, and go to the Community of Christ, and they will sell you one.
Awesome. Sounds great. Listen, what I want to roll into here to start off is, how long have you been doing Mormon book review with your YouTube channel now?
It started in the very first book review was in March of 2021, and my very first interview was in April with Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents. And then the show evolved from being a book review show to basically being one of the top destinations for a who's who of anybody within the Mormon scholarly community, as well in Mormon culture, the influence culture, actors, movies. We do all sorts of things. It's become a full spectrum show, everything Mormon or restorationist related. So it's become, I tell people, so there's this chain called Canadian Tire in Canada, but it's their Walmart. It says Canadian Tire, but people don't go there to buy tires. They go there to buy everything else. Mormon Book Reviews is kind of the Canadian Tire, where it's, yes, we still talk about books, but it's become much more than that. It's become a one-stop shopping place for all things restoration related.
Okay, so that's what I want to talk about, because you're in a unique position of talking to, and I know that you talk to a lot of the different sects of restoration.
Yes.
Churches, but I'm going to focus on Latter-day Saints here.
Sure.
And so you have that breadth of communication and content across the restoration movement, but you also have the breadth of, let's just call it, different strains of Latter-day Saint Mormonism. That is everything from maybe anti or critical all the way over to very faith-based, right?
Correct.
How do you possibly do that? How can you do that in a position? Because what I've learned in running a YouTube channel is that you tend to find, and I fight this, but you tend to find silos.
Yes.
Where you're going to put out content, you get the positive feedback, and you try to avoid the negative feedback. And so I see a lot of people, they go directly at a specific audience and then they keep going that direction, right? And
yes.
We see that in the media, in politics. It's just very easy to do that. You target a certain audience. You've targeted more than one audience in doing this. How do you keep that going?
Dr. Andy Mel, my good friend, said that my channel is the Switzerland of Mormonism. And I think it really has become that in last February, when I was on one of my trips to Utah this year, within the course of a few days, I was taping an interview with John Dehlin of Mormon Stories for my channel. And then a few days later, I'm in the studios of the More Good Foundation taping for Saints Unscripted, one of the leading LDS channels for Mormon or LDS youth, right? And the church knows that I'm doing this. The church they knew at the More Good Foundation that I'm very good friends with John Dehlin. But I think what's happened is that I've established this level of credibility throughout the community that I truly am a safe space for all different voices. And I think that's really important, because I've earned the trust of John Dehlin and Radio Free Mormon and Sandra Tanner and my friends over at Saints Unscripted, with Jeff McCullough, with you, with Jacob Hansen, with Rebecca Biblioteca, with Maven, you name it. Anybody who's the who's who within this space, whether they're anti, they're pro, or they're evangelical, they're all friends with me. And they all know that I'm treated fairly. Now, I do get some people attack me, but for the most part, it's 98, 99% positive. And the question is, how in the world do I do this? And that's a very good question. And partly, part of me thinks, like, why hasn't other people done this? Because I'm trying to model what civil behavior looks like, about having civil conversations with those you disagree with. And I think that this is what the channel is trying to do, is being able to establish that you can actually talk to somebody that you fundamentally disagree with, but recognize the fact that they are fellow image bearers. So that was what God told me. He says, just remember that person that you disagree with is a fellow image bearer and treat them accordingly. They're created, they are a child of God just like you are. So you treat them with respect and with dignity, recognizing that we're brothers and sisters in the human community, right? And we're all image bearers. So that's the first step. You don't demonize your opponent. You listen to them. And the Bible tells us to love your enemies and to turn the other cheek. So I think you're also following Christ's way of doing this as well. Talking to, and he went and talked to the people that you weren't supposed to talk to. He was hanging out with the prostitutes. He was hanging out with the tax collectors. He was speaking to the woman at the well. And we've had that conversation before. And he's modeling that behavior too, that we as Christians are supposed to follow. So I'm really literally just trying to follow. And then I'm going to following Paul, and I'm engaging the marketplace of ideas. You know, I mean, the models are there. It's right in our scriptures, how you engage people from the other, if you will, from the other side, and treat them with dignity and respect. So I'm just implementing what I would consider biblical principles into what I'm trying to do with what's become kind of a ministry of trying to be civil. And you know, and that's what's so fascinating to me. And of course, one of the reasons we had me on was to talk about my Utah Interfaith Forum. And I want to give you the story about the Utah Interfaith Forum before we talk about the YouTube channel. I want to talk about the Facebook group. So earlier this summer, there's this gentleman who made me an admin for this group. It's called Utah Interfaith Forum. He wished to remain anonymous, but I know he's a faithful Latter-day Saint based in Utah. And he's like, I'd like you to be part of this group. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I said, look, I'm involved in other stuff. I really don't have time to deal with a group, a private Facebook group. But over the course of a few months, it grew to 1,000 members. And then on Labor Day, he goes to me, says, Steve, I'm handing you this group. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I built the Utah Interfaith Forum basing it on the principles that you've been teaching us on your channel. You've been modeling the behavior of what interfaith should look like. I never even considered what I was doing interfaith, but at that moment I was like, oh yeah, I've been doing interfaith all along. So he hands me this group, and then the natural extension to me was, well, if we're going to have a 1,000-member group that's having these wonderful conversations with Muslims and Jews and Christians and Hindus and ethical atheists and Latter-day Saints, and then talk all the different Latter-day Saint groups and restoration groups all talking to each other in this forum. I thought, this is a beautiful thing that's happening. And of course, me being a YouTuber primarily, I thought, well, I want to take that and make it a YouTube channel in which we can have interfaith conversations where I would interview people from other faiths and again, I'm not making this like another MBR. I really want to make this just like a side project that I think is important and have conversations. And because it's Utah Interfaith Forum, it's going to, obviously, the dominant religion in Utah is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it's all within that context of a Utah-centered interfaith conversation. And I just think it's a beautiful thing. And so I decided to start this YouTube channel called Utah Interfaith Channel, and I actually reached out to you saying, hey, Greg, I'd like to talk to you about this, about other things as well. But it's just it's just a small little project but I really do feel God wants me to do it. And this Latter-day Saint felt led of the Holy Ghost to set up this group to give to me. So I believe that God is in the matter, and I'm just following his lead.
Okay, so let's step back on that a second. So two things on that. Number one, you say that you think God is involved with this. Number two, I would say that I would go back to why are you doing this? Right. So those two things. And I think that they go together. Number one, in most cases, if you're an evangelical and I'm a Latter-day Saint, we kind of stay in our own groups.
Right.
Right. It's much easier. You're more comfortable. You're in with the club. So that goes to, why would you do this? Why do you want to be uncomfortable? Because that's what it requires. I've done this. You have to be uncomfortable. Number two is, why do you think if you're an evangelical and you believe in the tenets of evangelicalism and Protestantism, right? Why do you think God would instruct you or guide you to work with Latter-day Saints and others in the Mormon tradition?
You know, it's fascinating because for me, when I started studying Mormonism, we've already talked to this before, but since I was a little kid and then started my collection in high school, I didn't think of any of it as being God. I just thought of it was I'm just interested in the subject like a Civil War history buff is interested in their subject, right?
Mhm.
And even then, as an atheist, as I'm consuming almost tons of these materials of Latter-day Saints and educating myself to the point where you could, within the scholarly community, I get no pushback from any of the top scholars of Mormonism that think that, who does he think he is, type kind of thing. They don't get any of that. They respect it, and I get some of the highest compliments possible from the scholarly community. So I have a lot of respect, because even though I don't have all these, doctorates and degrees and, all these titles, they recognize that what I bring to the table is somewhat formidable, that I can engage some of the top scholars of Mormonism on an intellect. So this is the question, look, I remember, I was in the midst of my depression, and I even thought it to myself. I'm thinking, if you don't mind me, I'm going to say a little bit of a bad word, but I think it's appropriate. I remember sitting on the couch and thinking, why in the hell am I doing all this Mormon stuff in the midst of my depression, right? Like, why? This doesn't make any sense to me. And so what I've learned is that then, as this journey has taken me, where I've gone through the gauntlet, I've gone through the refiner's fire, that I've become a new creature, that I've recognized that now I can see why God's hand was on the endeavor the entire time, looking back at it. And so when you say, how do you know God's calling you? It's because I recognize the God's calling has been on my life the whole time, and I spent most of my life running from that calling. And now that I've embraced that calling, everything just comes very easy. Like you even said, what makes you uncomfortable? Actually, I'm not uncomfortable at all, because I know I'm doing the Lord's work. And when you're doing the Lord's work, there's this level of peace that you have in your life where it's like, I'm not uncomfortable. I'm just following God's lead. And it's like with God, when my phone dings, I'm like, okay, God wants me to talk to that person. That's really the attitude I take, And honestly, I think that's just part of my spiritual journey and development. So then how do I reconcile this as an evangelical? What you have to understand is I deconstructed my faith as an atheist. So I come back into faith, back into my community as a deconstructed Christian. So I'm looking through things from a different lens. But I've also learned to realize, like, I totally understand, atheists, why you're angry with God. I totally understand, atheists, why you feel like you just need to burn the whole thing down. Been there, done that, got it. But now that I've been able to come full circle and be healed in my life, I totally empathize with the atheists. So I'm not uncomfortable when you go after me about my beliefs. I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's me 5 years ago. I get it. So I can deal with the atheist. I can talk to the other people from different faiths, because then, of course, as you're reconstructing a faith, you're like, well, what does faith look like? And honestly, I think it looks a lot different than people realize. I think that because I've deconstructed, but then God, what he was doing while I was deconstructing the scriptures and my faith, God was also deconstructing me. And I didn't realize it at the time. So I come out of this from the perspective that, I don't want to sound like I'm like this great holy guy or anything like that. I feel like I still think like an atheist in many ways. I still think very naturalistically. But I can't doubt God's hand on this endeavor, because it's a daily confirmation from him that I'm doing his will. That's the best I can. I know it's a long-winded answer, but does that answer your question? Because I hope it did.
Yeah, it does. It answers the question, but I would follow it up with, I do a lot of interfaith work as well, and I've got friends high up in the Church of England. I've got friends at the SBC.
Yep. Yeah.
I do a lot of work with Jeff McCullough, who you know.
Right.
I love it. Right. I love doing this, but there is an immense amount of pushback on this from both sides. Whether I'm dealing with the Church of England or the SBC or Jeff McCullough or others, those three main ones, there is a pushback from both sides, that says, why do this? What are you doing this? And I can see why most people who would start doing something like this would quit doing it because of it's almost like I'm not going to say it's a no-win, because I think it is a win, but to many, it might appear that way because of the pushback that you get from your same side and from the other side. And so you have a certain idea as an evangelical, as an example, of God and maybe destiny in the future with God, heaven, right? What does heaven mean to you? I have an idea of who God is that's different than you. I believe it's the same God. And I have a different idea of what heaven is, right? So with that in mind, it is, beyond taking it outside of my own religion, taking it outside of your religion, and placing God above both of us outside of those things, I think that's a must, because you have to say to yourself, why would you work with someone who has different beliefs than you? On the evangelical side, I would say a lot of evangelicals would say they don't believe in the same Jesus. So why are you working with them on this instead of just calling them to repentance? And so you said originally that this was a calling of God. I would say, why do you think God would want this? Because as I go through that work, as I do this, it is some of the richest experience that I have, and the most spiritual that I have.
Because I think God is waiting he wants unity in the body. I think he wants to come back for Jesus to come back with a bride without spot or blemish. I think that what we're doing is trying to reconnect the body that has caught man-made institutions have divided us. And God looks at us as all believers in Jesus. And so we're brothers and sisters, and we're part of the family. And I think part of God's role is for us to like I like to tell people, I said, I like to, let's see what I like to do. I like to break down walls and blow up silos is what I like to do, because I really feel that these man-made institutions are what keeps division in the body. And I guess this kind of goes back to me kind of being like a radical Protestant, and I'm a bit of a Christian anarchist. So I like to make other people feel uncomfortable, because I do feel like people feel in their comfort zone. And, I don't, because I'm able to be comfortable in places where most people are uncomfortable, I that's where I really flourish. Because it's like, man, if you could see what I see, if you could have the conversations that I have, if you can be blessed by Latter-day Saints like I'm blessed, you'll see a whole other side. I tell people, I talked to David Boyce of 52 Churches in 52 Weeks about this, and Kyle Bashir's. We had the same conversation. It was actually it was with Kyle the first time I mentioned it to him. And Kyle's a Baptist minister. He was raised attended a Baptist seminary. He's an assistant pastor of a mega church in Mobile, Alabama, and he's a top flight Mormon scholar. And I told him, I said, the advantage that we have that's over all the other evangelicals who are haters of the restoration is that we get to see the pearls of the restoration that others don't get to see, because we've earned the trust and respect of people within the movement. And once you actually see the pearls of the restoration, you see a very beautiful thing. And it's actually edifying. And actually, I know that it's of God, because it's building my faith and enhancing my spiritual walk every time I engage my brothers and sisters in the restoration. So I know we are cousins. You guys in many ways are birthed out of the Second Great Awakening. You guys, young Joseph Smith was a young Methodist exhorter who would plead for people to do altar calls and come up and get saved after the Methodist minister would speak. Joseph Smith and his family were steeped in the evangelical world. That April 6, 1830 gathering to start the Church of Christ was full of born-again, spirit-filled Christians. Them's my people. And so when I look at the restoration from that perspective, and then I engage the text of the Book of Mormon, I'm like, evangelicals, this is the most Christian book ever written on American soil. Why in the world would you want to reject it? See, to me, the key thing is this. It's the blessings I'm receiving from the restoration, this confirmation to me that this is God's will.
Okay, so you bring up the Book of Mormon. Let me ask you about that. So the most Christian book, there's famously said, another Catholic theologian said the same thing. What does that mean to you, right, as far as the Book of Mormon? Because obviously it's kind of the elephant in the room sometimes when you're looking from a, if I speak with someone who's on the Protestant side, the term that is used typically is it biblical?
Right.
Right. Because the Bible is the authority.
Right.
And so here you have another book of scripture that is outside. It is certainly, if you're going to, is it biblical? Is the Book of Mormon biblical? It certainly parallels a number of things there, but what is it? Do you feel that the Book of Mormon is at least inspired?
I would say that that's a key phrase. I would go so far as to say lowercase I inspired, absolutely. Okay. I do think there's look, the other day I'm talking with David Hawking, who's the editor of the Annotated Book of Mormon. Okay. And we're doing this Zoom call, and he pulls up the Psalm of Nephi.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going through it, and I'm reading through it, and then afterwards, like, I got to read the whole Psalm. So I'm reading the Psalm of Nephi, and I'm thinking, man, could a semi-illiterate farm boy really have written this? Could have crafted this? So to me, it's like it gives me pause. There's a beauty and elegance in the Book of Mormon that I wish I tell outsiders. I said, separate Joseph Smith from the Book of Mormon, separate the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from the Book of Mormon. Just engage the text, and you tell me what you see. Now, I talk to Christians, and they're always, but this is the thing: none of them have actually read the Book of Mormon. It's like there was what was his name? I think it was the Catholic writer in the 1950s who wrote that, yeah, the Book of Mormon is the one book that you can have an opinion of without ever reading it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like they attack a book that they've never read. And I think that is a insult, because no Christian would tolerate somebody attacking the Bible and the person never read it. They'd be like, well, you're not being fair. I remember this guy, I'm at a Christian bookstore, and he keeps on telling me why he rejects the Book of Mormon. I said, well, can you tell me specifically? I asked him 3 separate times, can you tell me specifically what's in the Book of Mormon that bothers you as a Christian? He couldn't answer the question. Why? Because he didn't read the book. Well, that's bearing false witness, because you're lying, because you're saying you reject the Book of Mormon, but you never read it. So to me, that's not Christian. Look, this is the Book of Mormon makes some audacious. It's an audacious thing. It shouldn't exist in one sense. The story is just bonkers when you think about it, right? But it does exist. Look, whether you want to take a naturalistic explanation, that's fine. I did a 3-hour thing about naturalistic explanation of the Book of Mormon on Mormon Stories. I've done that already, right? But I still have to look at it as a believer. I can't just dismiss the Book of Mormon because and actually I don't dismiss it. I use the Book of Mormon to, one, make evangelicals feel uncomfortable, and I use the Book of Mormon to make Latter-day Saints feel uncomfortable. Because I'll be like, when I hear people talking about 1844 doctrines, Nauvoo era doctrines, and I'm like, I'll be like, well, God has a body, and he was once a man, and king followed discourse. I argue that I say, well, I got 2 witnesses. I got the Book of Mormon, and I got the Bible, and both of them attest that God is a spirit. And it seems they're 2 witnesses that seem to contradict the king followed discourse. In my mind, that's the approach that I take. So because I think that the Book of Mormon is a thoroughly biblical document in that sense, that it's having a conversation with our Bible. The Book of Mormon is having a conversation with it. And I'm actually having that conversation with it too. And so to me, it's like, I think that to me is the better thing. So I go to evangelicals and say, listen, if you really want to have conversations with Mormons, use the Book of Mormon, because it's full of evangelical Protestant Pentecostal doctrine and beliefs. And it could be your best friend to engage civilly in the conversation. I want to have a different conversation than we've been having for 200 years. We're on the verge of 200 anniversaries for a bunch of things. We just had the 200, Moroni Day, 200th anniversary of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. We're over the course of the next 7 years are important touchstones within the restoration, important dates. And I feel, again, God placed me at this time and place at the 200th anniversary of us persecuting each other. Both sides have kind of been, going at it. It's the time is for us to do what the anti-Nephi Lehis did, is we bury our weapons and we start having conversations with each other. And just remember, the Book of Mormon gives us a 200-year proto-millennium where there are no matter of ites. I want us to eliminate all the ites between those in the restoration as well as between the evangelical world and the restoration.
I love that approach. I don't know if I was speaking to you about this or not, but I was at an interfaith event in Utah, and there was a Protestant preacher, a pastor, who was speaking right before me, and he got up and, knowing that there is an interfaith group that is listening, right? Mostly evangelicals and Latter-day Saints, and I would say mostly Latter-day Saints. He gets up there and he says, I want to read something out of the Book of Mormon. And he reads out of the Book of Mormon. And now I'm trying to remember what it was. I remember it was Mosiah. I think it was maybe about the beggars, but I can't remember. And he says, look, I don't preach out of the Book of Mormon because we don't do that, but I agree with this. And I just thought, good for you. It's not that I'm not saying good for you because, hey, it's my book. I'm just saying good for you because you're speaking to those who are listening, right? You're putting an olive branch out there without giving up your own principles,
right?
Without giving up your belief system. You're putting an olive branch out there. And I think that's an important thing to do. And I think you do that a lot. I think you do that really well.
Well, I think one of the most important things that ever happened to my channel, I don't know how much of the Israel stuff you're seeing that I'm covering, but literally the morning of the war breaks out, I'm on a Jerusalem-based channel on YouTube. Well, he was in Jerusalem at the time. He's actually an American citizen, but he was in Jerusalem at the time. Nehemiah Gordon of Nehemiah's Wall, one of the top Hebrew scholars in the world. Next thing you know, I'm thrust in this whole Jewish world, and I'm talking to rabbis in Jerusalem. I'm talking to other Christian organizations. And then, of course, you had Jason Olson come on to talk on your show, who's one of the leading scholars of Zionism. And I literally have this forum where I have an Orthodox Jew. It comes from an ultra-Orthodox background. Let's put it that way. We had a Arab Latter-day Saint. We had Jason Olson, who was a Jewish convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we had Dr. Nehemiah Gordon on my program. Dr. Nehemiah Gordon, as we're having this conversation about this great tragedy in the Middle East, starts quoting from the Book of Mormon, okay? And talks about the Gadianton robbers and parallels them with Hamas, and actually shows that the Gadianton robbers were actually more ethical than Hamas was in many ways. And
that is just real quick. I don't want to stop you from saying what you're saying, but there is no question that as you read the Book of Mormon and you start reading about terrorism, you start to understand it a lot better. You start to think, oh, this has been going on a long time.
Well, and to me, that was the most important thing, is that there's only one place in the world that's going to have the Hebrew scholar in the world quoting from the Book of Mormon. It's going to be on Mormon Book Reviews. And actually, we're actually toying with the idea of him and I reading through the Book of Mormon on my show and have different scholars come on and talk about the Book of Mormon. That could possibly be something we might do, maybe to tie it in with Come Follow Me with the Book of Mormon next year. And again, this is a heck of a lot more productive than what's been going on between our camps. And to me, it's like, let's engage the text. Let's read the Book of Mormon together. Whether you're an atheist, a skeptic, an evangelical, a Latter-day Saint, let's glean from it. Why? Because it exists. It's an important history of American literary history. Whether you like the Bible or not, it's still the most important book ever read. And in many ways, the Book of Mormon is the most important book ever written on American soil. Let's look at it that way and see what we can glean from it and learn from it. I think there's a lot of beauty in the Book of Mormon that isn't appreciated because of of its origin story, which that's just not fair. It's not fair.
Yeah. Great. All right, let's get into the Utah Interfaith Forum here. You talked a little bit about it, why you're starting it. What is its objective? What are you trying to accomplish with this?
I think, like I said, it was this channel was birthed out of the Utah Interfaith Forum Facebook group. It's just a tiny little channel. I don't even have 100 subscribers yet, but I want to give this thing a chance, folks. I want you to go to the Utah Interfaith Forum YouTube channel, and I'd like for you to subscribe to it. And what I'm going to start doing is maybe like monthly interviews with people from other faiths. And I'm also wanting to find like other faith leaders. Like maybe I'd like to have a Muslim interview a Latter-day Saint, or I'd like to see a Jewish person, interview an evangelical or an atheist. I don't care. I just want to show that we can model civil behavior in a way in which we can be people from different faith perspectives and still these conversations. One of my favorite people in the world is Leah Merritt, who's one of the few evangelical students at Brigham Young University who's heavily involved in interfaith dialogue on the campus. And she brings these forums together where she has a mom, a rabbi, an evangelical pastor, and a prominent Mormon scholar, all sitting and having conversations with each other. And again, I love what Leah's doing. Again, it's another evangelical doing a really good work, like Jeff McCullough and myself and David Boyce and all these other people that are coming out of the woodwork now and really truly trying to have a different type of conversation. So the Utah Interfaith Forum basically is doing what my channel's been doing all along. Like the Faithful Latter-day Saint said, I just built this group, and now what is the channel under the principles that you operate under, which is to be civil, listen to other people, don't try to get into arguments. And again, the Utah Interfaith Forum is not for people to go in and say, my God can beat up your God. That's not the point. And you'll be kicked out of the group if you do that. What we want to say is, what do you bring to the table? More importantly, what does your faith tradition bring to the table, right? That's the conversation. Tell us the good that your rituals do for you, what your faith does to you. Bring the good to the table, okay? If you're an atheist with an ethos, tell us why, like your ethical worldview system. If you have an ethical system that's helped you, bring that to the table, right? I want to have positive, productive conversations, and I want people talking about the positive things, and at the same time, not do kumbaya and say, oh, we all get along, we all worship the same God. I don't want to do that either. I just want to say, hey, I'm going to go visit a Sikh temple in Tampa, and I'm going to go there, and I love the Sikhs because they open their temples out to the homeless and feed them, and they feed people, no questions asked. They even let them sleep in their temples. And it's like, man, that sounds a lot like Jesus to me. So even though they're Sikhs, they're doing the Lord's work in that way because they're feeding the poor. So I think I want to honor aspects that I would recognize as Christ-like attributes, even within Eastern communities as well. That to me is what you do. And then I have the conversations with the Sikh while we're breaking bread and just say, this is Jesus. This is what he means to me. And it inspires me. And there's the channel right there, the Utah Interfaith Forum. Because it only got 50 something subscribers, and maybe it won't get 1,000. I don't care. I just want to have these. Look, I know why it's not that big.
I just subscribed live. There you
go. Thank you. I know why it's not big, because like we said, interfaith is hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy. You know that. I know that. And so I want to acknowledge that it is not easy. That's why it's not growing leaps and bounds. That's fine. And plus, I haven't had the time to really, because of the stuff in Israel happening and because of all the other work. And, literally, I'm working like 5 or 6 different projects right now. But the Utah Interfaith Forum was, to me, it's worth it enough to reach out to Greg, my friend, and say, listen, dude, I'd like to talk about it because I think it's the next thing that God wants me to do. And again, I literally wasn't planning on doing this group, but I just feel like God wants me to do more interfaith stuff. So I'm going to do that. So now I have a secondary forum in which I can now, have conversations that aren't necessarily directly related to what I'm doing on my main channel. It just gives me some freedom, a different avenue to express myself and also let others express themselves as well.
Awesome. Well, for those of you that are listening, go over to YouTube and subscribe to the Utah Interfaith Forum. It's found at youtube.com /at Utah Interfaith. I have subscribed. Looking forward to those interviews that you put on there, and appreciate your friendship, Stephen, and all that you're doing. Really do.
Thank you. No, I really do appreciate you. And I get a lot of pushback from people every time I have you on my channel. And I just think it's unfair. You come to the table with a different perspective, and I don't necessarily agree with everything you say or do either, my friend.
What?
But I don't, Greg. But that's fine. I feel like you're bringing something to the table. You are representative of a very important facet of many people who agree with you in the restoration. And I don't believe that you should be silenced because you say things that make maybe people feel uncomfortable. I think I don't mind making people feel uncomfortable. And if you want to do the same, that's fine. And, of course, if you're a civil person and you are a civil person and you get pushback, Greg, you're willing to listen to the other side too. That's the key thing. That's what it's all about. Just be civil and decent in this whole discourse. And, let's have adult conversations. Let's quit playing these games and hiding behind our keyboards and attacking people's character just because, I got a lot of attacks recently from a lot of evangelicals. And I went on Facebook and kind of just said, I'm kind of having a tough time right now. And a person messaged me back and said, we often forget when we see you, social influencers, media influencers like you, we don't think of you as being human beings. But she said, I know you exist because I saw you at Sunstone last year. So you are a real person who has real feelings. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And she's specifically, I said, yeah, that's right. I'm a human being. So just be nice to Greg. Be nice to me, because honestly, I've had off the record conversations with you, Greg. You seem to be just a decent guy. And I don't think you have any malevolency about you at all. And so you're just a decent guy who's bringing concerns to the table, and I think that's fine. I don't get why we have to hate on you because you make people from a different political persuasion uncomfortable. That's kind of what our system was supposed to be. It was having competing different ideas, and then we hash them out and we work it out. That's America. That's what we were supposed to be. And I feel really bad about the state of affairs, both on the left and the right, because we're both doing it, man. We need to get centered again, man, and find because we've gone, our nation is falling apart. It's becoming untethered, and people are just going into these different camps. I think it's ugly. That's why I think I'm doing what I'm doing, because I'm showing that we can apply these principles, one to Israel and the Middle East, into interreligious dialogue. I believe we can take these same principles and apply it in the political realm as well. So that to me is really why I think God's hand's on this.
Stephen, really appreciate it. Appreciate your words, your support, and we're going to get you back on soon.
Yeah, we had so many other things to talk about. By the way, I want to let you know I do want to have you back on too, because we've discussed this in the past. I want to have a conversation where can ex-Mormons and Latter-day Saints get along?
Yeah,
I think that's going to be a fabulous panel discussion.
Let's do it. All right, Stephen, thanks so much.
Thank you.